Um, Folks, I'm really happy to be here. The only thing I'm concerned about is that I feel like as I'm looking at myself on Zoom, all of a sudden I feel like I'm like 10 years older. But aside from that, tonight we're going to talk about some financial aid. I'm going to share my screen so we can see everything. Rebecca, can you just give me a thumbs up? Make sure you got everything. Awesome. So folks, financial aid is certainly a topic that really gets a lot of people going. And at the end of the day, I just want to take an opportunity to introduce myself. So my name is Ryan Depew. I'm the Senior Director of Undergraduate Admissions here at Iona University. I've been working in the higher ed space for about 12 years or so at various institutions, 3 of which here in the Northeast. And before that, long before I came to the dark side in higher education, I had wanted to be a school counselor, and I worked in the school counseling side. So I've seen this process from a couple of different angles. And one thing I can assure you is I understand that one of the dominant emotions driving the bus through this entire process is that of fear and anxiety, right? Students are afraid of making the wrong choice of institution. Moms and dads are totally freaked out about the cost, right? So tonight I want to talk with you about understanding financial aid, because from where I sit, a lot of the fear and a lot of the anxieties that families have regarding the process comes from a place of not knowing. It just comes from a place of not understanding the terms or how we get certain places, etc. So tonight I'm going to take the opportunity to go through each aspect of the financial aid process, giving you as much insight, arming you with the knowledge to hopefully reduce the anxieties through the process, just so you know what's coming down the pipeline. This also, I try to make it as interactive as possible here in Zoom. It tends to be a little tough across the computer, but nevertheless, we're going to have a little bit of fun tonight, or at least pretend a little bit. We might have a little bit by accident, but let's kick off and get started. So at the end of the day, I usually kind of pose a question to my audience about what is financial aid. So ultimately, to define financial aid in the simplest of terms, right? It is this, voila, right? This is also my funniest slide in the deck. So it's all downhill from here, folks. But ultimately, financial aid is assistance to create access to higher education. It is and can be money for you and your student through the process, okay? But financial aid doesn't all come from the same place. And I think that's one of the biggest misunderstandings with many students and families that I serve. They just think about financial aid and they don't understand that there's different buckets where the money actually comes from. So tonight, I'm going to take an opportunity to unpack this. I'm going to talk about each one of the types of financial aid. I'm going to define it, how you can apply for it, what you need to be thinking about through the process as a parent, what you need to be thinking about through the process as a student. And then we'll come to the conclusion and answer some questions and I'll answer some common pitfalls that I've run into on my side of the desk. But there's 3 types of aid, and I'm going to go back to this slide in just a few minutes as I really dig deep into each one of these. But there's 3 places where money can come from for students, right? That's it. There's your merit-based aid. What the student does at the secondary level, academically speaking, can and will translate to an opportunity for students to receive money at the collegiate level, okay? That's what it means at the highest end. There's participatory awards or participation-based awards. So that's based on what the student does when they get to the institution to which they enroll, right? That makes a difference, and it could result in money for the student again. And then finally, there's need-based aid, which is evidenced by a couple of documents we're going to talk about tonight, but that's based on the need expressed by the family for financial assistance, okay? So those are the 3 buckets. Excuse me. Those are the 3 buckets that I want everybody to be aware of. If you walk away with nothing else from the evening, please walk away with understanding that these are the places where money's coming from, regardless of institution, even though some institutions may not have all types of these aids, okay? So before we get into the nitty-gritty, I would like to take the opportunity to define a couple of the terms that you hear financial aid people and admissions people use all the time, right? And it gets confusing. This is why people get freaked out about financial aid. What EFC, COA, net price, cost, etc. I'm going to take a few moments to talk about each one of these things and what it means to you in very tangible terms as a family, okay? So first and foremost, let's talk about expected family contribution. This is a fairly simple term. Nevertheless, it's something that people understand, and they usually kind of butt their heads against with the U.S. government. So an expected family contribution, and please know for the next academic cycle, the Fed in their infinite wisdom, they're going to be changing the term, but the essence of what it means is not going to change. And the expected family contribution is ultimately what the Fed thinks that you can afford for a college tuition. Simple as that. It's a calculus that they put you and your family's financial dynamic through, largely based on income, even though it's not all income, but largely based on income into the family. And they ultimately assess what they think you can afford for school. Now, most of my families, especially ones I'm serving here in Westchester, take issue with the EFC. They're like, well, Ryan, I'm paying, I don't know, $22,000 a year in taxes, that, is that accounted for in the EFC? Unfortunately, it doesn't always work that way. That's not us, that's the Fed. But that's what the term is. It's ultimately just a calculus that you put your family's financials through, and it's giving you a number. It's going to spit out a number, and the number is what it thinks you could afford for school. Okay. There's two types of costs when you get to college. There's a direct cost and an indirect cost. Let's talk about the direct cost. So the direct cost is quite simply what I'm going to bill out to you as you go through the process. That's the bill that you receive from Iona University, from Harvard, from Pepperdine, think of a school, whatever it is. That is your tuition, fees, room, board, etc. That's what we're going to be billing out to a student, right? So you say, Ryan, what would be an indirect cost? So an indirect cost would be an expense that's associated with going to that respective institution that's not incurred by enrolling at the, that sounds kind of funny. It's really just, it's a cost associated with going to the institution that you're not being billed for. The biggest, most popular one is textbooks, right? Most schools don't have a direct cost where they're billing you for textbooks. So you have to buy those every semester or rent them or whatever it is. An indirect cost would be you're a student from PHS and you decide to go to Alabama or UMiami for school. Well, an indirect cost would be the cost of your travel, right? Your flights, your airfare during peak times of the year, getting to and from your respective campus. That's an indirect cost, okay? So those are the two things that comprise your costs, right? That's your two places where costs come from. Remember, direct cost is only what you're going to be billed for. Indirect costs can be variable depending on a variety of situations, right? A student who lives in Westchester is going to have a differential when it comes to indirect cost than a student who might be enrolling at Iona University who's coming from Florida, right? They have more indirect costs that are coming from Florida attending Iona University. Here's a term that's thrown around fairly frequently. There's something called a cost of attendance. The COA is simply adding both the direct and indirect costs together, right? That's your total cost of attending an institution. Remember, you're usually going to estimate, you're going to guess what your indirect costs are going to be because they can be variable things. They're not always going to be the same. Textbooks aren't the same every year. Travel's not the same every year. But your total cost of attendance is the term that you're going to want to be familiar with, right? Because that's really what you want to allocate budget-wise for you or your student to attend said institution. And each institution will produce a cost of attendance as they average out. They take averages from students from everywhere they've enrolled and say, this is the direct cost. That's easy. We know what our cost is going to be. And on average, this is the indirect cost for students. And we're going to add that into our overall cost so you can understand and can plan and allocate accordingly. They call that the cost of attendance, okay? Now, I talked about a moment ago expressing financial need. So how does an institution identify need, right? So the need is simply the subtraction of your EFC from the total cost of attendance. That's equaling your need or your gap. That's what's established. That's how institutions define what your need is going to be, right? Your total awarded. I know I'm moving along, folks, but I want to make sure we have plenty of time to talk about everything tonight. Your total award or your total offer letter is your entire financial aid package. Financial aid is all encompassing. So when you get an offer letter in the mail, right? You're like, oh wow, I got this great offer letter in the mail. That usually encompasses your merit-based monies, your participatory monies, and also your need-based monies. That's your total offer letter, right? Now, here's a big thing, your net price. How do you get the net price, right? What is going to cost you out of pocket? It's going to be, right, the cost of attendance. And from that, you're going to subtract your total offer letter, your total award, everything you got there. So you just take the big offer number, subtract it from the big cost of attendance number, and then boom, you got what your out of price is going to be at a respective institution. Okay. Now, folks, again, this sounds incredibly simple. Nevertheless, I'd like to start at the beginning. It's all about being comfortable with the terms that are being thrown around at you. And frankly, if I could critique my world in the world of admissions and financial aid, there's no regulation on how financial aid letters look. So they all can look different. They're marketing pieces from institutions. Some are more clear than others about what their price is going to be after they subtract your total offer. Some are very clear and some are not very clear. So I like to go over these terms because I would like you to look for these things as you're going through each one of your offer letters. I got a few more things I'd love to talk about. Here we go. The FAFSA and CSS Profile. These are the documents that everybody loves. Right now, it's October, those documents are open, and that's what everybody's doing on the weekend. So if you would like to be like a cool parent, do what all the other cool parents are doing. Sit down this weekend, pour yourself a glass of wine, do the FAFSA. It's the fun thing to do. But truly, those are the two documents that are utilized to evidence financial need for either federal and or institutional aid to a student, okay? Grants and scholarships. Grants and scholarships are and should be your favorite things and terms on any financial aid award letter, right? Grants and scholarships indicate that that money is essentially free. It's money given to you. It's money you don't have to pay back. That's exactly what you want to see a whole lot of on your financial aid award letters. Loans, on the other hand, they accrue interest and you got to pay those bad boys back, whether they be private or federal, it doesn't matter. They can appear on your financial aid offer. We'll talk about those as well. Two more things I'd like to cover before we get on into the core of our presentation. Firstly, work study. I want to talk about work study very briefly in that many students and families really misunderstand the work study, the federal work study program, how it's utilized, how it's allocated to students, etc. Ultimately, many students will receive work study as part of their financial aid offer. Kudos. That's fantastic. However, most families mistakenly believe that that $2,000 of work study is going to be subtracted from their total cost. No, it doesn't work that way. Work study is really just saying that you're eligible to earn up to that amount of money. So if you got $2,000 work study for the year, you're eligible to receive up to $2,000 for that specific calendar year in federal work study money. You're going to be working for that money on campus and you're paid either weekly or bi-weekly, depending upon how the school's payroll is set up. And you'll be paid whatever the minimum rate is on that specific campus, okay? I always like to share that with families and students through the process, just because sometimes you might see institutions come out with like really, really large work studies and they're like, you got $5,000 of work study. And the parents are kind of thinking like, oh, that's subtracted from the cost. Not really. And sometimes the student may not even earn up to that amount of money. It might be so much money, they just can't earn that in the course of one calendar year. So as you go through work study and you see that pop up in your offer letters, that's a fantastic thing. Just know it's the work study is ultimately created to help offset the cost of education, but is paid to the student and they can utilize it in any way that they decide to. The final term I'll talk about is full need institutions, or institutions that meet full expressed need. There's quite a few of them out there. There's not hundreds and hundreds of them. Like there's about 4,000 schools nationwide. It's a very small grouping of institutions that will meet full need. However, full need institutions are going to be institutions. Usually, they're institutions that have about $1 billion plus in endowment in the bank, and that institution is going to say to students, whatever your gap is, whatever your need is that you express, we're going to cover that. Okay. So that's something that's really important to know. I know that there has been many great things happening in the world of admissions. And one of the great things in the world of admissions that's happening to help continue to increase access to education is that many of those full need met institutions have recently amended their policies where they're not going to factor in federal-based loans first before they meet the rest of the need, where they used to do that. But the reason why I bring all of this up is if you're looking at institutions that meet full need and you think you're going to express need, ask the question, will I be packaged with my federal-based student loans before you meet full need or afterwards? That's a big question. I always direct families to ask that as they go through the process. Whew. Folks, that was the most fun slides we had regarding the work. So I really want to dip back into the core of the presentation. Let's talk about the types of financial aid, how you can apply, what you need to know through the process. Just to remind everybody and refresh everybody's memory, there's 3 types of aid that come through on a financial aid offer letter. There's 3 buckets. Like this, it's a tangible way that I always think about it is like 3 distinct buckets where money comes from. The first place is merit-based aid. We have participation-based aid, and we have need-based aid. Let's dip into the merit-based aid first. So merit-based aid is entirely contingent upon a student's success at the time of application from their secondary school, right? Most colleges and universities in the US consider students for merit-based aid at the time of application. And here's the really groovy thing, folks. You can ask when you're in the information session at an institution, you can raise your hand and say, hi, question, do you have merit-based aid? And they're going to know exactly what you're talking about. The admissions counselor, whoever it is in the front of the room, they're not going to be dumbfounded. They're going to know exactly what you're asking. And they're going to say, yes, I have merit-based aid, or no, I do not have merit-based aid. Just for your own knowledge, generally speaking, the most competitive, the most selective institutions in the nation do not have merit-based aid. Okay, they're usually full need colleges, right? But so they usually don't have merit-based aid, although there's some things happening these days and where some of the schools are starting to meet need via merit-based aid. At the end of the day, what's happening on the school side? Institutions are utilizing a combination of academic credentials. They could be test scores, they're going to be your transcript, and we're going to pump all that stuff into an academic index, and it's going to spit out a number. It's going to place that student on one of our merit-based tier platforms, right? And that's ultimately what happens. Students are assigned merit-based aid based on their academic credentials that they carry with them. A lot of schools have recently amended their merit-based structures due to the pandemic and going test optional. So that has played a part in the whole process. You can ask whether or not scores will be part of the merit-based process. Most schools that went test optional, or I shouldn't say most, but many schools that went test optional are no longer utilizing scores to measure aid, just to level out the playing field, but they still could if they wanted to. So it really depends on the institution. Here's a really great thing about merit-based aid. Generally speaking, the largest piece of your financial aid pie, that big old beautiful pie, is going to be merit-based aid. Here's the fun thing. Last year, folks, I know there's so much talk about the cost of college these days. Education is expensive, no doubt about it. It's even expensive at the K-12 side. We've seen that, right? But here's the thing. Last year, the average tuition discounting was 54.6%. So on average, across the entire nation, students were paying half, a little less than half, for what it costs to attend that respective institution, okay? So, and one of the ways that schools are usually discounting their cost is through merit-based aid. So a lot of schools these days are coming out swinging when it comes to merit-based aid, just to make themselves as competitive as possible. Here's a helpful hint for all the students and families here today. Pay attention to application deadlines. It's not just about your application, but it's about being considered for aid, right? So you might have a large flagship state institution that says, our regular decision deadline is February 15th. And you're like, oh, okay, cool. I approve. You have till February 15th to put that application in. Then they'll say, but if you want to be considered for the merit-based aid, you have to have your application submitted by December 15th. And these dates are arbitrary, folks. I encourage you to check each school's website for all the deadline dates. Check the school website, not like another vendor, not Naviance, because it may not have been updated. So check the school's website to ensure, or the Common App, or the respective application coalition, et cetera. But check each school's deadlines, because they might have a deadline for the application itself, but they might have an earlier deadline for consideration for merit-based aid. Okay, that's a really helpful hint. Don't let that one pass you by. If you submit your application a day late, they may not consider you for merit-based aid. Okay, great. And if you have questions, folks, just pop them into the Q&A. I promise I'll get to them at the very end of the presentation. Let's talk about participation-based aid, right? There's some really great ways to reduce the cost of attending an institution by doing stuff there, right? Here's the trick, folks. At the end of the day, schools are looking for students to actively contribute to campus. A student who contributes, A, is happier, they're more likely to graduate in 4 years, they're more likely to retain, and most importantly to schools is they're more likely to stay engaged as an active alumni, right? So schools kind of caught on to this, and what they've done is they've created some great pathways for students to reduce their cost by getting engaged on campus. So the award is contingent on the student's involvement in an activity or program on campus. And there's dozens of these type of awards, folks. It varies by institution. It varies by year. There's so many to consider, but here's a couple that come top of mind, right? There's athletics, right? You think about Division I or II athletics, right? They have participatory awards through NCAA or NIA, right? Through their respective organization to attend that institution and receive an athletic scholarship. There's community service awards. There's awards that might be based on your residential status. There's schools that say, hey, if you want to live here on campus, I'm going to give you a $2,000 a year or $1,000 a year award for living here on campus. You might have them for the honors program. There's specialty academic programs. So take, for instance, here at Iona, we have a National Science Foundation, an NSF scholarship for students who want to study STEM, right? They have to have a specific major, but they major in a biochemistry, and they could receive this specific award here at Iona University, okay? Here's the kicker, folks. There's a potential addition of applications, essays, interviews, etc., to be considered for this type of aid, right? Oftentimes, as you're going through the process of being admitted to a respective institution, rely upon your admissions counselor at that respective institution. Your admissions counselor is your all-purpose liaison for all your needs, right? And a great admissions counselor is going to look at one of their admits and say, hey, Jessica, I see that you are an Irish step dancer. And, would you happen to know that we have an Irish step dance scholarship here at, Iona University? This is what I want you to do. This is who you need to connect with for an audition to receive it. And folks, that's actually true. We do have an Irish step dance program here. And pipers, if any pipers out there who play bagpipes, we'd love to have you here. We have some great scholarships for students, but we can walk you through that process. Oftentimes, you can also check the school's webpage. They'll give you application deadlines, essays, what you need to do through the entire process. So check the school's webpage and leverage your resources at that institution, i.e. your admissions counselor, to ensure that you're being considered for these type of awards. Whew. Now we get to the stuff that everybody, I'm sure, is thinking about. It's on their mind. There's two ways to apply for need-based aid. There's your FAFSA, which is a free application for federal student aid. That's the website. It's studentaid.gov. There's a mobile app. It's actually fairly friendly. And then there's the CSS Profile. The CSS Profile is brought to you by the same fun people who bring you things like APs and SATs. They're just a ball of fun, and they brought you a financial aid document as well, just to spread the love. But let's kind of dig in deep and talk about each one of these documents, okay? So firstly, I'll kick off with the FAFSA, because the FAFSA is a document that every school requires here in the US, right? Or I rescind that. Every school will consider if you submit it to that respective institution. Some schools will require that you submit a FAFSA, even if you don't want to be considered for aid. Some schools will not. You really have to check with each institution. But here's the fun stuff, folks. It opens up October 1st of the student's senior year. So like I said before, if you want to really get into it, and you're a parent of a senior, this is the time to start working on your financial aid. Pour yourself a glass of wine, only one. You do two, you start moving commas and zeros, and you mess up your financial aid. You don't want to do that, folks, okay? Just one glass of wine. But you start working on this as soon as possible, because I promise you that it's going to make your life easier. The sooner you complete this document, the better it is for the student. The tax information that you're utilizing for your FAFSA is from the previous fiscal year. It's the taxes you got back this spring. last year, right? Last year's taxes, the taxes you got back this year. There's a lot of parts of the college process that I want the student to be driving the bus on, okay? I really want to be having the conversation with students about a lot of what's going on inside their head, what's going on between your ears, what are they really looking for? I also similarly oftentimes invite families to the conversation. However, this is an aspect of the college process that I usually flip-flop that, where I really want to be in front of the heads of household or the parents or the guardians, whoever it is in the house, because at the end of the day, there's not many 18-year-olds or 19-year-olds or 17-year-olds out there that can really speak eloquently about the true family financial dynamic and the money coming in, right? And some families may not even want to share that with their students. I can respect that. You know, it's really ultimately every family's decision. This is something that I want every family to really get involved in if they can. God bless, have your students sit with you and watch you do it. So maybe they can do it in their sophomore year, junior year, senior year. I think there's an advantage to doing it that way. But this is a part of the process I really want the moms and or dads and or guardians to really kind of take the lead on, at least at this age. Here's a helpful hint. And again, this sounds incredibly elementary, folks, but I couldn't tell you how many people get this wrong every year at every institution I've ever worked. Make sure that you use the student's information. It's the student's FAFSA. The parents have a section on the FAFSA, but if you're filling out the student on behalf of your student, fill it out as if you are the student, okay? I can't tell you how frequently every year parents are like, we did the FAFSA like in November, Ryan. I don't know why you don't have it. And then it finally hits, oh, the mom or dad filled it out as them, and it's incorrect, right? So just make sure that you're using the student's information on the FAFSA. Here's another common question that I get all the time. What if I have twins or siblings going into school at the same time? You have to complete 2 FAFSAs. Every student completes their own FAFSA every year through the process, okay? Great. I will actually, the anonymous question that came up, I'll take that question at the very end because I might get to it before then too. If there were any slide on the deck that I would say take a picture of, this bad boy would be it. I've condensed the FAFSA process into 9 steps. If I threw a 10th step in there, there would be a glass of wine because you've earned it, folks. But nevertheless, this is truly your step-by-step process of filling out the FAFSA. And folks, I gotta tell you, the FAFSA gets a bad rap these days. It's become significantly easier in the past 10 years. God knows, even the past 20 years. When I fill out the FAFSA on paper, that thing was really, really rough. I have nightmares to this day. It wakes me up in a cold sweat, right? These days, the FAFSA process has become, sorry about that, I have like 5 devices here on the desk. The FAFSA has become much easier for students and families to complete. And ultimately, that's due in large part to this really nifty thing called the IRS data retrieval tool, right? And I'll get to that in just a second. But folks, this is what it is. This is how you complete the FAFSA. The really great thing about the FAFSA is that you can start, you can stop, save, start, stop, save. You can take as long as you like for this process. And if you have questions, this is a really, this is a place where I think technology does help families. There are some great tutorials on the studentaid.gov website. There's some great Q&As on the studentaid.gov website. YouTube videos, sometimes, you might have a YouTube video where there's somebody who's trying to sell their product about helping you finish the FAFSA. These are things that you can do by yourself, folks. You can pay somebody to do it if you like. Some people will pay their accountant to do their FAFSA. You can do whatever you'd like, but I do believe this is something that everybody can do by themselves if they were so inclined to do. The one thing I do want to note on the list here is listing of the schools. A common roadblock or obstruction that a lot of families get into is the student's been admitted or applying to more than 10 schools. You can only list 10 schools in your FAFSA. If and when that happens, what you can do, you simply add in your first list of 10 and then confirm with each institution that they've received your FAFSA, download it, because you don't own the FAFSA. We don't. We have to download it. After it's downloaded to the institution and the institution has it, you can delete that school off your FAFSA and add another one. So if your student is considering more than 10 schools, that's the way you can list more than that. Quick question. Anonymous asked, can the FAFSA be completed before college application is completed? And the answer is yes, absolutely. You don't have to complete an application to that respective school to fill out the FAFSA. You just simply add in the school's code and step 4. I believe, and we'll see how good I am right now. I think I own a 002737, or maybe it's 3727, something like that. Nevertheless, you just add in each institution, and then it goes to that respective institution when they pull down your FAFSA from the Fed, which will usually be at some point in the late fall and sometimes early winter. Does the order of schools? Oh, good question. Gosh, you guys are bringing a fire tonight. I love it. Does the order of the list matter to schools? Do schools know the order? We used to. Back in the day, in the Stone Age, when I first worked in admissions, there was something. There was a FAFSA order. Schools had access to that. Schools no longer have access to FAFSA order. We just know that you submitted the FAFSA to us. That's all. So order is not relevant in any way, manner, shape, or form. We'll never know. Great question. And I mean, might as well, I'm kind of on fire so far. Is there an upper limit on income above which it does not make sense to complete the FAFSA? So I get this question a lot, folks. I live here in Westchester. I serve a lot of students here in Westchester. I always have. And, frankly, a lot of families have an AGI where they're like, man, I don't know if it makes sense for me to do it, or my neighbor told me not to do it. They didn't get anything. Here's the kicker, folks. Remember, it's not just about the FAFSA. It's how the FAFSA, if I want to kind of go back, right, and how we identify need, right? It's the cost of attendance from that respective institution measured against your EFC. That's your need, right? So what campus you're considering and how much that campus costs is also factored in, right? So you might have a neighbor been like, I got nothing from my SUNY school. Okay, well, SUNYs are going to be under 30K per year, right? Max. Maybe you're looking at, I don't know, Chicago, that by 2025, they're going to hit 100K, right? So you might express more need for that specific school at 100K over the 30K cost of an in-state institution. So this is my best practice, folks. Fill out the FAFSA at least once going into the process. Just fill it out, because you don't know what you're going to get. That's one of the toughest things that I think a lot of families struggle with. Is something that I still struggle with families when I'm having conversations with them. I'm a big fan of transparency. And sometimes we just don't know what you're going to get until we actually get there. And here's the kicker. You don't know what you're going to get when you fill out the FAFSA. Maybe your student only gets qualified for a little bit of federal work study. Well, in that case, I say congratulations. That's a great opportunity for the student to connect with the campus in a unique way, earn a little bit of money in the process, and they have one more person kind of looking out for them while they're on campus. Maybe if you complete the FAFSA, you don't get anything, but you still, no matter what, you're always at the very least going to be considered for federal-based loans, right? Now, I'll talk about this in just a moment. But the FAFSA does have an opportunity to unlock some federal-based unsubsidized loans, meaning that it's going to accrue interest while you're in school. But the rate at which you're accruing interest is going to be a lot better than anything you're going to see in the private sector. So if nothing else, the FAFSA, if you're loaning money out for school, right, the FAFSA is still going to give you an opportunity to unlock, at the very least, the best kind of rates you'll have for any type of loan in the nation, right? So that's something else that you'd want to consider. Do schools know the other schools you're applying to? No, they typically don't. Most schools usually don't share the information with each other. And can I touch upon the major changes from last year's FAFSA? Overall, it's going to be it's the calculations and how they're looking at what is the EFC. Frankly, that's the biggest piece of the process. That's the thing that's really scariest for most people. The FAFSA is largely based on income. It measures like total assets and savings. I think it measures it at like 5%. It changes year to year, but I think presently it's like a 5.9% or something to that tune. So that does change every year in how they consider assets of family. But largely it's usually going to be income, and that formula changes ever so slightly every year. And to be frank, the FAFSA has gotten easier every year. In my humble opinion, it's become easier to complete for my families. And if there's one thing I could tell you, is that after a little bit of practice, it becomes tremendously easier for the most part. If you think about your curve, right? Your middle 50% of families, they're going to be fairly standard going through the FAFSA process. You'll have a couple outliers with maybe they're going through separation, or there's a small business involved, or some things like that. But most families in the middle 50%, their family financials don't change significantly year to year, and it's going to be a fairly straightforward process. I've had families call me up and say I've done it in 15 minutes by the time they get to senior year. Major changes to household families. So it really depends on residency of the student, if I'm understanding your question correctly. So who in the household income, whose income is being considered. So there has been some changes regarding that. I'm going to drive you to the webpage. Frankly, I don't want to be misquoted in any way, manner, shape, or form regarding whose income is going to be considered with the new guidelines. Studentaid.gov is going to be exceptionally helpful and really defining which parent or which caregiver in the process is going to be responsible, or at least considered, when it comes to income. I hope that answers your question. And a couple of these things I'll hang on to the very end. I see a lot of questions coming up, and I want to make sure that I get through the entire presentation, because I probably will answer some of your questions in the remainder of the slide deck. So let's continue to move forward. The CSS profile. So the FAFSA would be considered by every institution here in the US. The CSS profile is not. The CSS profile is attempting to do the same thing, which is measure your family financial need in the dynamic. However, it's a much more thorough document. It's really going to get into it. Iona University does not consider, we're not a profile institution. My previous institution was up in Connecticut. The CSS profile is just much more complex than the FAFSA. So it does take more time to complete. Here's a helpful hint, folks. Don't complete the CSS profile unless you know you have to. Look at your students list, where they're applying or where they've been admitted. And if you're on a visit, or you're talking to an admissions counselor, or talking to a financial aid rep, just simply ask, are you a profile institution? Are you a CSS school? Either way, they're going to know exactly what you're talking about. They're going to say yes, they're going to say no. And that's going to inform you what to do next. Again, the CSS profile is a much more thorough document. You're going to use many of the same documents that you utilized for the FAFSA, your taxes and things of that nature, but it's going to take you more time. They're looking at more things. They're looking at more assets. They're looking at more things within the dynamic, more liabilities. However, the advantage is you only have to do it once. It's a one-shot deal. So for the schools that require the CSS profile, they're requiring it for freshman year entry. And by time after that, they're saying, you're cool, we're all good here. And for schools that leverage the CSS profile, they're utilizing the CSS profile to evidence financial need that and grants and scholarships, or need that would be given, need-based aid that would be given by the institution. So that institution, if they're a profile school, they would require the FAFSA and the CSS profile. That's a 2 glass of wine type of thing. They would require both, because you need the FAFSA for federal stuff and you need the CSS profile for institutions. Just ask whether or not you have to do it. You can Google it. Google is your friend in this particular situation. You can Google College Board CSS profile. It'll take you right where you sign up. I think it's a $25 fee to start completing one. There are fee waivers for students who express need. You just start, save. The good news is it opens on October 1st. Generally speaking, I encourage families to start with the FAFSA. The FAFSA is kind of like dipping into like the shallow end of the pool. You're kind of getting in there. You're going to wait around a little bit. You're going to kind of get familiarized with all the documents, which lines on your taxes that you're going to be pulling numbers from, right? And then if you do need to complete the FAFSA, that's when you can go into the deep end and you can start kind of going at it. But that's my usual recommendation to students and families. Let's talk about some of the results of need-based aid. As I'm looking at the clock, I got to hustle up here. So you can get grants, free money, scholarships, free money. God bless. Love it. There's federal state money. You can get a Pell Grant. There's the TAP, New York State TAP Award Tuition Assistance Program. You could receive something called the SEOG, Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant. And last but not least, something that will appear on everyone's financial aid offer if they complete a FAFSA is a subsidized and or unsubsidized federal-based loans. What's the difference? The federal subsidized and non-subsidized fixed rate right now is at 2.7% interest. It's great. You know, if you are loaning money out for school, I'm not going to be bold enough to tell you what to do, what not to do. That's entirely up to you, but you're going to unlock, or there are some really friendly interest rates when it comes to subsidized and unsubsidized loans. The difference between the two: subsidized loans will not accrue interest while the student's still enrolled in an institution. Unsubsidized does. That's the only difference between the two. You have your plus loan. That's a loan for a parent of the dependent child. Currently, the rate is at 7.5. It's going up, you know, hashtag inflation. But that's the plus loan. That's something you'll come into a little bit later on, that you would be considered for based on need. And that's totally institutionally dependent too. Your institution will notify you if you're eligible for that plus loan. Here's a couple alternatives, right? There's private lenders out there. There's thousands of them, folks, and some are very favorable, some are not so favorable, and it really also depends on your credit, right? Like your eligibility as a consumer, right? That's really what you are here, especially to the private lenders. Schools will give you websites that you can shop around with literally thousands and thousands and thousands of lenders. There's tons of them out there. And I would say if you're shopping, just shop smart. You know, look at the terms, read the fine print, just like you would for your mortgage or your financing on your car. No different from that. Just make sure that you check all the terms and conditions. At the end of the day, when it comes to student loans, the federal-based loans are usually the most friendly to consolidate post-graduation, and they're also most friendly when it comes to post-graduation in that you're able to kind of successfully knock down the interest rate pretty successfully after paying on time for 72 months or whatever it might be. So what now? We've kind of hashed through a lot of information, folks, and thanks for sticking with me. I know I went through so much, and this is probably the least fun thing in the entire admissions process. So I truly thank you for staying awake for the entirety of the conversation. But what now? At the end of the process, I want you to review your financial aid award letters, right? Here's the big thing, folks: do the math. I can't tell you how often that this happens to families. They don't see the forest through the trees. They get these fantastic merit-based offers or these great offer awards, and their total offer is like phenomenal. Like, wow, right? Like, holy crap! I got $50,000 from this institution to enroll there, right? But the total cost is 80 grand. So your net price is still going to be 30K out of pocket, right? So just make sure you do the math. I have families come to me every year and they're asking us to match awards from other institutions, and we're still cheaper, and that's independent of Iona. This is every institution I've ever served, and all my colleagues around the country experience the same thing. So just do the math, folks. It's your friend. Excel is your friend in this situation. I encourage you to do it. Keep a record with your spreadsheet. Keep a spreadsheet of records. Here's something else I recommend. Connect with your financial aid office with questions as soon as possible. Do not sleep on anything. If you look at the award, something looks off, you don't understand it, you have questions, concerns, comments, critiques, whatever it is, call them right away. Shoot them an email, follow up. What will happen is, folks, financial aid offices are usually at their peak right before decision day, which is May 1st. And families, and they get upset. And God knows, I'm a big fan of customer service. But families, they might have wait times on the phone of an hour plus, just because, you'll have 10,000 students trying to contact the financial aid office within a week and a half time frame, or it might be 20,000, it could be 50,000, whatever it is, folks. Okay. So just be very mindful of that. Try to head off questions as early as possible. That way you're never under the gun. You never want to get to a place where May 1st is looming and you finally get your question answered, things work out, and you find out and discover that no matter what, you still can't afford that institution. So do these things as early as you can. It just helps reduce the stress and anxiety in an already stressful and anxious process. I oftentimes get questions: can I negotiate? Yes and no. So there are appeals in institutions. You can ask for an appeal. The answer may not be yes, you get more money. It could be no. I do have to let you know, folks, at the end of the day, you have to remember the financial aid, regardless of the form it's in, is built in to be an incentive to enroll that student. So most institutions are going to come out like swinging and the best they can. However, you can still ask for some additional money. I would encourage you to connect with the financial aid office to learn more about their appeal process and what it looks like at their school. There's some schools that are out there, you call them up and hello, I'd like more money. And they're like, please hold. And then come back 2 minutes later. We've gotten you more money, $5,000, and boom, you're done, right? You got more money. There are other schools, and this is probably more frequent, where you contact the office and you say, I would like to file an appeal, and they'll say, no problem. They give you a document, a PDF for you to complete, and you fill it out, you submit it back to them, and they'll reply to you within 10 business days. That's usually the commonplace, but contact each respective aid office for an appeal. Second to that, there is a type of an appeal called a special circumstance, right? A special circumstance appeal would be based on, there's been a change in your family financials, right? So like you complete the FAFSA and you say, Ryan, well, I lost my job, or there's been a death in the family, or there's elder care, or illness, or whatever. There's a lot of things that may have changed. And you're saying to yourself, well, my income isn't what it was last year. And obviously that happened with a lot of people during COVID. If this is you, fill out your financial aid FAFSA like you would normally. Just complete it, okay? You don't want to hold up that part of the process. Then after your FAFSA is completed and you receive an offer letter from an institution, call them up or shoot them an email and ask for a special conditions appeal, state your rationale, and what they'll do is they'll give you another form and say complete it, and you'll have to evidence whatever you're saying on the phone, like loss of job or income or what have you. What your current income is, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then they'll repackage you accordingly, okay? So that's a question I get all the time. There are special circumstances out there. If you feel that's you, the financial aid office and your financial aid officer are going to be the best people to help you through that process. A couple more helpful hints before we wrap up and take a little Q&A. So great helpful hint, right? Resource for you. Every school in the nation publishes on their webpage something called the net price calculator, NPC, right? I saved this for last for a very good reason. Walk away with this information. You're armed with something. You can Google it. Google is your friend. You can Google Iona University net price calculator, Harvard University net price calculator, whatever. And it's going to guide you to a page where you're going to enter in some information about yourself, who the student is. It might, every NPC is going to ask for varying levels of information about the student, but ultimately the goal is going to spit out a number that's just an estimate to the family, what you could receive and what it could cost you to attend an institution. Why this is so valuable, it's because it allows students and families to have conversations, real conversations about the cost of school. What's possible, what's not possible. I always tell families, keep an open mind. Private schools, even though we usually have the highest cost, we usually have ways to reduce that cost vis-a-vis those three those buckets I was talking about before. But the net price calculator is such a fantastic tool for families just to have real conversations about what it could cost them in the process. Is $5,000 too much? 10, 15, 20, 30? I don't know. The number is arbitrary. It's really up to each family, but the NPC is a great resource. Secondly, financial aid and school websites. Go there for information. Sometimes it's tough though, because it's kind of like finding a needle in a haystack. And if that's the case, ask your admissions counselor or financial aid counselor for helps. They can help you through the financial aid process. They can forward you the appropriate links. They can give you what you need because they're on the website so much more than you are, right? But go to those websites, hit them, browse them at your convenience. They're really, really great for you. And here's something that's really, really important to remember. Always remember, financial aid and the cost of an attendance will change student to student, school to school, and year to year. I know communities and families talk to each other all the time and are like, Johnny got this, and Billy got that, and Jessica got this, and Sandy and Sally got this. And that's fantastic. And I can really get behind that. But just know that the financial aid and how it's structured for that year is ultimately to work with that school on its missions and objectives and its goals for that specific academic cycle. So anything that happened previous to that or after that can be different, right? So that's always something that's really helpful for families to remember as they go through the process. And now I'm going to take an opportunity to dip into some of the Q&A. And folks, just so you know, my contact information is up on the screen. You can feel free to reach out to me at your convenience. That's my telephone number. That's my email address. Glad to take Q&A from you at another time. So anonymous, I recognize merit-based aid is a separate bucket. However, I read that schools use demographic information to adjust merit-based awards. Do schools use information on the FAFSA to do this? I just want to try and make sure I got the question right. So ultimately, merit-based aid will be independent of all other variables in the process. So it could be, I don't know, Bill Gates's daughter who applies to Iona University, and that doesn't matter to me. If she qualifies for a certain tier of merit-based aid, that's what she's going to get. It's independent of other variables, whether need, demographics, etc. Does the financial aid package from a college change from year to year? What if your circumstances change? For example, if you have another student entering college? Ooh, great question. So the answer is yes, it can, but it may not, right? So it really depends on the institution. If you have another student enrolling in an institution, it could impact your EFC. So it could impact, you know, your need-based and how much need that you're expressing per student. In my experience, to be frank, folks, it usually impacts the aid portion less than people think it will, but it can. But it varies institutionally, right? Like how much you're already paying for your students' respective education will impact that. So my best course of action would be to contact each school individually to find out, right? Because maybe you're receiving a Pell Grant federally, and then the next year you are no longer Pell eligible based on income, you would lose the Pell Grant, but that wouldn't be institutionally, that would be federal. So the schools are still bound by federal legislation to change based on your need that you're expressing. Francesca asks, how do I know if I should submit the CSS? Simply ask. Just say, are you a profile school? Do you require the CSS profile at your respective institution? They'll say yes or no. Is it just the custodial parent who completes the CSS with his or her information? So yeah, at the end of the day, the CSS has been more static over time. So information from families, from the entire family is largely considered. However, whoever the student lives with, 51% of the time, or the majority of the time, that's the person who's going to be putting their information on the CSS profile. Does it make a difference if a parent or student contacts the financial aid office? No, it doesn't. Generally speaking, here's the best thing in the world. Folks, this is great advice. I'm glad it came up. I usually encourage students and parents to contact the financial aid office if you're able to. And God knows, I know how busy students are. I know how busy parents are. It's a crazy time. It's a mad world, folks. But if you can sit down at the kitchen table and put everybody on speakerphone so your student can hear what's going on, it's just so educational for the student. At the end of the day, like, this is a part of the process. I usually encourage parents to kind of drive the bus. However, if you can include your student in this process, I just think the benefits extend so far beyond just, you know, post-secondary education into life. I have twins applying same year. How does this affect everything? Great question, Emma. And congratulations. It's going to be a fun process. And I genuinely mean that. Ultimately, it doesn't change the process a whole heck of a lot. You're just going to consider your twins separately. So they're going to fill out their own FAFSAs and or CSSs. That sounds weird, but nevertheless, I'll accept it. They're going to fill out their own documents every step of the way, just like they filled out their own application. So just one thing I always like to kind of equate a FAFSA and or CSS to, think about it as an application to be considered for need-based aid. That's really all it is in essence. And then you're evidencing your family financials, you're evidencing what you might need with your family financials on that application, whether it be the FAFSA and or CSS profile. Well, folks, I mean, that's the end of the questions. I'll close out the slide deck. I really enjoyed the conversation tonight. Again, you have my contact information. Certainly happy to field additional questions and post. Feel free to reach out to me at any point. Otherwise, Rebecca and everybody at PHS, I really appreciate you
Thank you.
bringing me out tonight.